My full name is Anna Grace Watson Crum, and I was born November the 26th, 1933. And as we were growing up, we were called by our full name. I was Anna Grace, and your mother was Jimmy Ruth, and all of us went by our full name. And when I started to school at high school, I had been teased some in my younger school years about the Anna, which I was named after my grandmother Watson. Her name was Annabelle, and so that's where I got the Anna. But the kids at school, of course, they loved to tease. And back then, one of the good comic characters in the Sunday comics was Orphan Annie, and so they would call me Orphan Annie, and I didn't like that. And so when I started high school, I just dropped Anna and started going by Grace. So I've been Grace for a long time. I was rather young then, and so I don't really know how long it took them to build it, but my dad, Jim D. Watson, and a man named Gay Hipsher, who lived near us over in the Junction community, which is where I was born. Daddy and Gay Hipsher built this house, and like I say, I don't know how long it took them to build it, but I think we moved into it in 1939, before Christmas, because I was 6 years old, and then the next September I started school, so I was almost 7 years old before I started first grade, because of my birthday being in November.
Which room was yours?
Well, when we started out, there were two big beds in the back bedroom, and Mama and Daddy slept in one, and the youngest kids slept in the other one, and usually there'd be a crib there for the baby. And of course, Carolyn was born just a little bit before we moved here, and so she was a baby, and she slept in the crib, and Ruth and I slept in the bed. Well, let's see. Yeah.
So y'all
Ruth
were
and I
little
slept in the
kids.
other bed in the back bedroom. And then the bigger girls got the front bedroom. Not Ruth, Vita and Patty had the front bedroom.
So how would you graduate to the front bedroom?
Well, it wasn't until Vita and Patty went off to college, and then Ruth and I got to move to the front bedroom. And Ruth didn't want to go. She was kind of scared to be that far down the hall, that big long hall, and by ourselves down here in the front. And so for a while, I had a bedroom all to myself. And I could sit up and read as late as I wanted to. And I kind of enjoyed that, because I'd never had even a bed to myself, much less a whole room. But Ruth finally got up the nerve to come down the long hall and sleep in the front bedroom with me. I don't think they had any drawn out plans or anything. They just went. Now, Gay Hipsher was a good carpenter, very good carpenter, and a very good cabinet maker and all that. I'm sure they probably had to get someone to help with the plumbing and the electricity, but I don't know who. But other than that, they built the whole thing and hauled the rock. All the rock on the outside is from this place. And they went out and found all that and hauled it up and everything. And some of the lumber used was from an old schoolhouse. Now, I don't know where the schoolhouse was located, but it had been abandoned, and Daddy bought it. And so some of the lumber in the house is from an old schoolhouse. And I remember hearing someone say that when it was completely finished, that all the materials and I guess what he paid Gay Hipsher for helping him came to over $3,000. Both of them were farmers, and of course my dad had the dairy and farming, and so they didn't work during the day. They waited until all their farm chores and dairy chores were done. Then they'd come over here and work on it until dark. Yes, everyone, and down to Carolyn. And like I say, Carolyn was just a baby. She was born in September, and we moved in either late November or or before Christmas in December. I'm not sure just when. So she was only about 3.5 months old. Well, of course, there was an older child who died from appendicitis, and her name was Wilma Jean. But of course, she died when I was a baby, and so I don't remember her either. So, do you want me to tell their full names?
No, just.
Do you want that would make Vita mad if I told her full name.
I know her name. Just tell me when we moved into the house, Patty, David, kind of mom and dad, just kind of name who all moved in.
Yeah, it was Vita and Patty and David and me and Ruth, and then Carolyn was the baby, and Mom and Daddy, and Papa Watson. My daddy's father was living with us then. He lived with us for several years over in the Junction House, and I remember him taking care of me when I was a baby. I think after Wilma Jean died that my mother probably went into a depression for a while, and Papa really helped her out a lot. And he wasn't able to go out and work on the farm anymore, but he helped Mama there in the house and with the children and stuff. And I can remember him rocking me and feeding me and helping me get dressed. And so my Papa Watson took care of me a lot when I was a little kid. I doubt if there are any, formal pictures. There might be some photos of him somewhere.
Okay.
Collier reminds me of him quite a bit. He was taller than my dad. My daddy wasn't very tall, but Papa Watson was kind of a tall guy. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, we had the dairy. Daddy always had the dairy. That was his first love, was the dairy. And he always named his dairy cows. And so I'd say that was the main thing, was the dairy. But he also raised a lot of cotton. Back then, there was a lot of cotton in this part of the country. Not so much now. And of course, the feed for the cat, the oats and wheat and stuff that he'd grow, to feed the cows. And when there would be hard times, when we would have drought and stuff, and he'd run out of feed and couldn't feed the cows, Daddy would have to sell them off, because just couldn't afford to keep feeding them and not making enough off of them to pay for it. And you could tell it just hurt him so bad to have to sell off his dairy herd.
Right.
And the minute things got better, he'd turn around and buy him another dairy herd and start milking cows again. Well, let's see. I started to high school in Coleman, and of course, we were not supposed to go to high school in Coleman. We were supposed to go to Moselle High School, which was out in the country in that direction. And Vita and Patty didn't want to go there, and so they talked Daddy into transferring them. And I think he had to pay a fee to transfer us. And so from then on, we all went into Coleman to the high school, which I was happy about, because it was a bigger high school and more things going on and everything. And so anyway, I was about almost 14 when I started to high school in 1948. Well, it was pretty lonely, and I think we all, kind of lived for the day we could get off the farm, really, And for one thing, we didn't have a telephone out here. Daddy never did let us put in a phone, and they put that in after he had died, and Mama was living out here by herself. And so they put in the telephone, and they had to buy all the poles up to the road, where the old schoolhouse is. They had to buy all the poles and wire, had to pay for that to have the telephone installed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, it did. It cost quite a bit, and I'm sure that's why Daddy had never had it done before. But that's one thing we just really kind of resented when we were teenagers, because our boyfriends couldn't call us up and say, can I come pick you up tonight, and so either they didn't come at all, or they'd come and surprise us, and our hair would be up in curlers, and.
It's hard to have a social life when you have no telephone.
Yes, Well, that was kind of one of my things anyway. At night, when the sun was going down, I'd go out and sit on one of these little deals that reaches out there and lean back against the arch. And and just watch the sun go down, and then I'd sit there and wait for the first star to come out so I could make my wish on the first star.
Now, what would you usually
That
wish
was,
on?
oh, I don't know, just silly things that kids wish on, you know.
Or wish for a
Yeah,
boy? How
and
old
then
were you?
yeah, and then as I got older and into my teenage years, I would sit out there and you could see the car lights coming, and you'd see them as they crossed the railroad track, and then you'd kind of lose them for a while. But then if they turned, then you could see them coming this way, and you'd know, oh, that's somebody coming this direction, because there wasn't much of anybody else who lived around here. We were about 5 miles from any neighbor. So it was a good thing there were a bunch of us, so we had someone to play with, because there were no neighbors close enough to go play with. From the time I was a little, after we moved here and everything, usually on Saturday afternoons, we would go into town and go to the cowboy movie. When I was a little kid, we loved the cowboy movies. And Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and Lash LaRue and and they'd have a continuing serial, and the hero of the serial would just be in a terrible fix at the end of it, and they'd leave him hanging there, so we could hardly wait to go to the movie to find out if he got out of that, if he fell off the mountain or drowned or what. But Ruth and I got in trouble one time because when Carolyn was probably about 3, we started taking her to the movies with us. Mama decided she could go to the movies with us. Well, Ruth and I got so involved in one of the movies that we forgot to keep an eye on Carolyn. And she got up and wandered out of the movie theater. It was during election time, and they were having speeches. They would pull up like a cattle trailer or something for the guy to stand up on, and with a microphone, and he would make political speeches. Well, they were doing that there real close to the theater, and Carolyn wandered down there, and someone found her, and put her up there with the speaker and asked her what her name was. And she says, Ta-Nehisi, well, nobody knew what that meant. But finally someone recognized her and said, oh, I know Ira always parks, in the same place. I'll go take her to Ira. And Mama brought her back to the movie theater, and we still had not even missed her. Boy, we were in trouble then.
You got taken out by your ear.
And after that, Carolyn sat between us, and Ruth would hold one side of her skirt, and I would hold the other side, and her dresses just looked terrible all the time from us gripping her. They were always wrinkled.
So she always had a little nose for trouble then.
Oh, yeah. Carolyn was always adventurous. Well, I'd like for them to know that Jimmy Watson built it with the help of one other person, mainly, and that he loved the land. He loved his land, and he loved his cows. And after he died, we couldn't sell any of the land for a while. It just seemed like we would have been betraying him to sell it, because it took him a long time to accumulate what land we had, and even during the Depression, when everyone else was in such dire straits. Of course, he had the dairy then over at Junction, and somehow he managed to buy land when everyone else was losing their businesses and losing their homes. He still managed to buy land. And so it was very important to him. And, I'd just like him to know that. Well, he was a very frugal man. And, he watched his money. And, of course, back then they didn't have charge cards, but he didn't allow us to run up any charges. At the stores in town, you could have a charge account and run up charges, but he didn't allow us to do that. And if something came up at school after I was in high school that I needed a special notebook or, some kind of school supplies, I could go down to the drugstore, usually Bowen's drugstore, and tell them, that I needed that and that my daddy would come in and pay for it tomorrow. And they'd let me have it because they trusted Jimmy Watson. They knew he'd pay it. And so I'd come home and tell Daddy what I'd done, and he'd go in the next day and pay for it. But, but that's as close as we came to having a charge account of any kind.
Right.
When it came time for him to buy a car or a new pickup for the farm or something, he saved his money till he had enough money to buy it. He never paid out anything like that, tractors or anything. I think the first thing that he paid out was when he built the new dairy farm across the highway over there. It was, a pretty big expense, and he did have to pay that one out.
Right.
I think my dad was raised mostly in Rockwood, Texas, and he had two brothers and a sister. No, three brothers and a sister. And his older brother, who I understand he was very close to, his name was Ernest, died when he was, I'm not really sure, the age 13 strikes me, but I'm not sure about that. And some kind of a really bad epidemic they had there. And after that, they decided to move away, and they moved to Coleman. And that's, as far back as I know anything about Dad. Mama, the Collier family, was mostly in East Texas, in Jasper. And I don't know how old she was when they moved to Coleman, but her mother's sister, who was married to a Delaney, they had moved to Coleman previously. And I don't know why they decided that they needed to move from where they were, but anyway, they moved to Coleman because the Delaneys lived here. And they lived out at Whitechapel on the other side of Coleman, and on a farm there next to the Delaneys. And it was really strange. After I married Ted, and I was talking to his mother one day, and she grew up out at Whitechapel also. And her mother died when she was about 3. And all of her older sisters and brothers had moved away. She was from a family of about 10 children. And so she had to take up the cooking duties for her father and her younger brother. And she had no idea about how to cook anything. And she started going over to see Mel Delaney. She said every morning she would go over to see Mel Delaney, and everybody called her Aunt Mel. And she would teach her how to cook one dish. And so that's how she learned how to cook for her father and her younger brother. And she didn't realize that Aunt Mel was my mother's aunt. And I thought that was kind of strange. After I'd married her son, we found out that we had that connection. My dad was good friends with Nathan Ferguson. And Nathan and his family lived down the road from us at Junction. And so anyway, they palled around, and Nathan started dating Nana Lee, who is my aunt, my mother's sister. And so Nathan got Daddy and Mama together, and they would double date. Drive their old Model Ts over there to pick them up. You just can't hardly leave a dairy herd. You have to milk them twice a day. But sometimes Daddy would have a good hand working for him that he could trust to go off and leave them for a few days. And we'd go to San Antonio and visit Uncle Nathan and Aunt Nana Lee. Because he always wanted to see Uncle Nathan. They were really good friends.
What was San Antonio like back then? What were trips like that like?
Oh, well, it was a much easier place to drive in than it is now.
Definitely.
And I was always very impressed because, growing up out here in the country, and just all I knew was the small town of Coleman, and so it just seemed huge to me. And we'd go swimming in the swimming pool and at the park, and just do things that we didn't get to do here. Well, we always got to see each other when our children were little kids. And of course, we were all just having kids right and left, And but we'd come home for Christmas to the farm because the little kids loved to come home to the farm for Christmas, and so that's what we did, and we'd get to see each other at least once a year that way. But then when we finally got to where we had so many kids and they were getting bigger and all this that we couldn't fit in the farmhouse anymore, and so we got to talking about, well, let's start having a family reunion, and we had been going to a Watson reunion at the Lampasas Park that included my father's cousins from Oklahoma and some from up in the Metroplex area. I don't know exactly where they live, but we would go and have it with them. But we decided, well, there's so many of us, let's just have a reunion with the Jim and Ira Watson children, and grandchildren. And so we'd talked about it, and so fine. Actually, I was the one who planned the first one, and of course, I was working full time, and I guess I was dragging my feet, according to Carolyn. So she jumped in and helped me. So Carolyn and I planned the first one, and then after that, we started taking turnabout. Well, I think I did it for about 3 years with somebody would help me those first 3 reunions. We have all the paperwork, that we saved, and you can look back and see that I was helping with those first 3. And then we started taking turnabout, doing it, being the boss, Oh, well, I love it. Of course, I never get to talk with as many people as I want to. When it's over, my jaws will just be sore from talking, and my elbows will be peeling, from leaning on the table and talking. And then I'll think, well, I didn't get to tell Carolyn this, or I didn't ask Ruth that. I realize you never have time to talk to everybody, that you want to, and find out all the news that you want to. It used to be harder, when we were having them at the state parks and we had to bring our own mattresses. Remember how you blew up mattresses, Scott?
I think that put me through college. Charged like about a quarter or 75 cents.
Right, and we had to bring all this stuff, all the cooking stuff and everything, and Ted and I kept all that stuff in Austin because it was near we lived nearer the parks than anyone else, so we kept all that stuff in our shed in the yard, and we'd have to bring all that out to it. Well, I hope that it will continue forever. I hope that your generation and the next one enjoy it enough that they'll keep it going. So I'm just about to get the age that I'm ready to turn it over to someone else in my family. I hope maybe Jack and Benny will take it over for me, and
you guys have certainly worn the boss hat enough.
Yeah. I don't know if we can turn over being the boss, but
but the work.
Yeah, the work.